So you can see here the ID was 0 before, and now it's 828. So same object, and Hibernate went and set the ID for me automatically. Thanks for pointing that out, Zach. So you notice here it actually inserts the store and inserts the customer. We didn't tell it to do. We did tell it to do that, but you notice I only saved the customer. So this actually comes in handy. Why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you be more explicit about it? Well, maybe I have some service in my code that only really knows about a customer, and I have some other service that knows how to attach a store to a customer and all the business rules around which stores this customer can be attached to or whatever. I don't have to concern my other service doesn't have to be concerned with also persisting the store. It can just persist the customer, and then my Hibernate mapping knows how to figure it out and just make it happen. So you see here it inserted both. So here we're going to close the database connection. We're going to reopen it again, and we're going to load the customer. Notice it just selects from customer. And then as soon as we access the store property, boom, it makes a hit to the store table. So it doesn't load it unless we tell it to. Now, lazy loading is the default. You can actually, if you know for a fact that every time you get the customer, you're going to turn around and get the store, you can tell NHibernate that. Say, don't lazy load this, or you can set a fetch strategy on it, and you can, because maybe sometimes you do want it to be lazy loaded and sometimes you don't, and so you can actually give NHibernate hints when you're loading it, either at runtime or in your configuration. You can actually say, just do them both, and it can actually do them in one batch to the database, and you save yourself a round trip. You can do it all in one shot. But you can see here, at least for now, we're just doing lazy loading. And now you notice it was transparent. Nowhere in our code did I actually tell it to load the store. With like link to SQL, for example, you'd have to say store.load possibly, or actually it would be at a collection. You have to say like orders.load. So it's totally transparent. So you see here, aside from this session.load, which I could wrap this in a repository. So my code has no knowledge whatsoever of NHibernate. The repository could be an XML repository, a file, some sort of file repository. It could be pulling things from a web service and deserializing them, or it could be a database, obviously. My code doesn't have to change at all because it just assumes that store will be there. It's a concern of the persistence layer when it needs to go and actually hit this database. Later during performance optimization, if I find that this lazy loading is causing us issues, then I can make the determination then to switch off lazy loading and go to a batch. Or vice versa, maybe the batch is killing me. I'm always loading the store for the customer when I don't really need it most of the time, so it's just sucking up network bandwidth. Finally, I delete the store. So first, to make sure there's no orders on it, it deletes from the customer. Yes, I try to select it back. This is going to throw an exception, and sure enough, here it is. We caught it. It says it was successfully deleted. Then we're going to try to load the store back up just to make sure that it didn't go and delete anything it wasn't supposed to. Sure enough, the store still exists, and Hibernate did not go and delete the store. We told it not to do that. So there's certain times where NHibernate's internal record keeping of objects can get out of sync. Basically, if you go and do another query and you load more objects, NHibernate will, at that point, if there's anything that needs flushing, it will do an auto flush, or it'll force flush at that point, because it needs to. Its internal record keeping will get out of sync in a bad way, and it'll screw everything up. So it actually needs to say, okay, wait. Before I start loading a bunch of objects, I have to get these things straightened out first, because this new reality coming in could change the way things look and modify my objects. And now I'm totally out. Now I don't know what changes were done by the loading and what changes were done by you. So I'm going to go ahead and commit everything to the database, and then I'll execute your query. So I think loads and then queries for multiple objects will trigger a flush. This is in the NHibernate documentation. If you get into a situation where this is causing you problems, consult the documentation on when flushing happens. Otherwise, you just need to explicitly call it yourself to tell NHibernate, okay, I'm done. I don't want any more batching. Make it so. Kick it off. I mentioned before, I showed where we tried to load the object. We loaded it from the database. It did a select statement. We called load again, and it gave me the object back, but it didn't actually go and hit the database again. This is because for the life of a session, basically a database connection, it actually has an object cache. So everything it loads from the database, it keeps a reference to. This is very important. This is a very important performance optimization, because if you're loading back a lot of objects, let's say you're loading a list of 50 customers, and it turns out 25 of those customers are related to the same store, and let's say you're selecting all the customers in all their stores, and 25 of the customers are related to the same store. You don't want to load that same store 25 times. So what NHibernate is going to do is say, okay, I just loaded this customer. He's related to store number 828. Oh, what do you know? I've already got that in my cache. I don't need to select him again. So I just keep selecting customers, and then until I hit one where it's something I don't have in cache, it's related to a store I don't have in cache, I'm going to go pull that. I'll have to do the select statement, and pull it back. In cases where you need to loop over a whole bunch of records, and I don't know, tabulate things. Normally you would probably do that in the database, but for whatever reason, let's say you're grabbing a list of 1,000 records in an email out table, and you need to loop through each one and send it out. The caching can actually bite you, because the cache can get so big, and you don't need the caching because every record you're loading is going to be unique. It's not related to anything else. The factory can actually produce a stateless session. Oh, I can't change it here, sorry, but you can say factory.open stateless session, and that does not do any caching at all. So in a normal scenario, that would really hose you, because you'd have a lot of performance problems, and it's going to be doing a bunch of selects that it doesn't need to do. But in the rare case where data loading is another example. If you're importing things from like a CSV file, but the data is kind of a questionable content, and you need to run it through all your validation and stuff like that. You're not looking for speed here. You're looking for quality. So we're gonna run it through our domain. So we're gonna fire up NHibernate, and we're gonna use a stateless session, and then we're actually gonna create domain objects and populate them from our CSV. That would be one example. Looping over an unknown quantity of objects, you'd want to use the stateless session. So that covers the first level cache. We'll talk about schema generation. I'm not prepared for that right now. We talked about MTO and cascade options, fetch strategies and join strategies. So you may have noticed that I have told it to lazy load, but you can actually tell it to prefetch. And even on a query by query basis, I can tell it to, okay, for this query, I want you to grab both of them at the same time. Don't lazy load. By default, it will use multi-select. So basically, it'll select the customer, get the store ID, and then turn around and do a select the store, where store ID equals whatever. If for whatever reason that's not good enough, or there's some performance problems with that, I can see it's an extra round trip. You can actually tell NHibernate to join on the store table, and it will pull both, all the columns from the customer table and all the columns from the store table in one big select statement, and then NHibernate can repiece the columns back together and hand you a customer with the store attached to it, all in one select statement. And then there's another thing when you're listing objects where you can tell it to use an outer join, just in case there's some nulls in there.